The radio had stopped working 9 minutes ago. Deputy Rachel Solis knew this because she had been counting. Counting was the only thing she could still do with precision, because her left leg was pinned beneath the trunk of a ponderosa pine that had come down across the hood of her cruiser at 3:47 in the afternoon on County Road 14, and the pain had narrowed her world to a set of very simple tasks. Breathe, count, don't scream. The tree had fallen without warning during the first real storm of October, and the weight of it had crushed the front quarter panel into the driver's side door and driven the steering column into the dash at an angle that trapped her from the hip down. She could feel her foot. She could not move it. The windshield was a web of cracks through which the snow came in sideways, and the engine had died on impact, which meant the heater had died with it, which meant the temperature inside the cruiser was dropping at a rate her body understood, even if her mind was trying not to calculate it. In the back seat, behind the mesh partition, 3 puppies huddled together on the blanket she had spread for them 2 hours ago when she'd picked them up from the side of the highway where someone had left them in a cardboard box with the flaps folded closed. They were 8 weeks old. They did not cry. They pressed into each other and shivered and watched her with 6 dark eyes that held no understanding of what was happening, only the absolute conviction that the person in the front seat was the person who would fix it. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What happens on this road, in this storm, is something that changed an entire county. We read every single one of your comments. Senior Chief Petty Officer Logan Hayes, United States Navy, retired, had been driving south on Route 120 toward Thermopolis when Diesel sat up in the passenger seat and stopped breathing the way he breathed when the world was ordinary. The dog did not bark. He did not shift or whine. He simply went from resting to operational in the space of a single breath. Ears locked forward, nostrils pulling the air in short, deliberate draws, his entire body vibrating at a frequency that Logan had learned over 7 years of working beside this animal in places where that frequency meant the difference between finding someone alive and finding them too late to never ignore. Logan checked the mirrors. He checked the road. He saw nothing but snow and wind and the gray-white curtain of an October blizzard that had arrived 12 hours ahead of the forecast and was already making the highway difficult. But Diesel was not looking at the highway. He was looking west, toward the tree line, toward a stretch of county road that split off from Route 120 and disappeared into a corridor of pine and rock that Logan had driven once before and remembered as the kind of road that forgave nothing. He didn't know yet what was at the end of that road. He would understand later, much later, that the dog had known before the wind had even carried the sound. Logan Hayes was 42 years old, and he carried himself with the particular economy of movement that belongs to men who have spent most of their adult lives in places where wasted motion attracts attention, and attention attracts fire. He was 6'1", 215 pounds, with the broad, flat plain build of someone whose strength had been assembled through function rather than appearance, shoulders built for load-bearing, hands built for grip and precision, a core that held steady under conditions that would have folded most men sideways. His hair was dark brown and cut close, silvering at the temples and along the back of his neck in a way that he had noticed in mirrors but never mentioned. His face was weathered and square-jawed, with a nose that had been broken in Kandahar in 2009 and set by a corpsman who had apologized in advance for the angle. His eyes were steel gray and deeply set beneath a brow that seemed permanently leveled, as though he were always in the process of measuring something, a distance, a threat, a person, and had long ago stopped needing to announce the results. They were not unkind eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had seen enough to know that kindness without capability was just sympathy, and sympathy without action was just watching. He had completed 4 deployments with Naval Special Warfare, 2 in Afghanistan's Kunar and Paktia provinces, 1 in Iraq's Anbar province during the final surge operations, and 1 in a theater in the Horn of Africa that he referred to only as East, and that existed in his records as a series of redacted dates and unsigned commendations. He had earned a Silver Star for a night extraction under fire in the Koringal Valley that had left him with 2 dead teammates and a piece of shrapnel in his right shoulder that set off metal detectors in airports and ached in the cold with a specificity that felt personal. He had been medically retired after his 4th deployment, when the accumulated blast exposure was finally acknowledged in a diagnosis he did not enjoy discussing, and he had moved to a small ranch property outside Meteets, Wyoming, because the mountains were honest, and the quiet was the kind that asked nothing of him, except to be present in it. He was not healed. He was managing. He had Diesel, and on most days, that was structure enough. Diesel was an 8-year-old German Shepherd, 86 pounds, with a coat that ran deep sable along his back and flanks, a rich, dark gradient of black and mahogany that lightened to warm amber across his chest and along the insides of his legs. His muzzle was beginning to show the faintest threads of gray, the way working dogs gray, not from age alone, but from the particular kind of aging that comes from years of sustained alertness in environments designed to destroy alertness. His right foreleg carried a limp that appeared only when he was cold, or when he had been still for too long, the remnant of a shrapnel wound sustained during a compound clearance in Paktia province that had required 2 surgeries and a recovery period during which Logan had slept on the floor of the veterinary facility at Bagram, because leaving was not something either of them did. Diesel's eyes were dark amber, almost copper, and they moved with the steady, methodical sweep of a sensor array that had been calibrated by years of training and years of deployment to distinguish between what was dangerous and what was merely loud. He did not react to thunder. He did not react to traffic or shouting or the particular chaos of civilian life that made some military working dogs pace and pant. He reacted to the things that mattered, and his definition of what mattered had been shaped in rooms and compounds and mountainsides where the margin between correct and fatal was measured in seconds. Logan had spent 14 months fighting the military working dog disposition process to adopt him. He had written letters to 3 members of Congress. He had driven to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas twice. He did not regret any of it. Diesel was not a pet. Diesel was the covenant. Logan turned the truck onto County Road 14. The road was unpaved, frozen, and already disappearing under 2 inches of new snow that the wind was rearranging faster than it could settle. The trees closed in from both sides, tall ponderosa pines, their branches heavy with wet snow, bending in the gusts with the slow, dangerous flexibility of wood that is approaching its limit. The air smelled like cold pine resin and ozone, and the light was the particular pewter gray of a sky that is committed fully to a storm and has no intention of relenting. The truck's heater pushed warm air across Logan's hands, but outside the cab the temperature was 19 degrees and falling, and the wind was turning the snow into something that moved horizontally and hit the windshield like sand. Diesel's intensity increased. He pressed his nose against the passenger window, and his breath fogged the glass in rapid bursts, and he made a sound. Low, sustained, not a growl and not a whine, but the sound a trained dog makes when he has found what he was looking for, and is now simply waiting for his handler to catch up. Logan saw the cruiser 300 yards ahead. It was half buried beneath the trunk of a pine that had snapped at the base and fallen directly across the vehicle's front end, and the emergency lights were not on, and the engine was not running, and the snow was already building against the driver's side in a drift that would, in another hour, make the car indistinguishable from the landscape. He stopped the truck. He got out. The cold hit him with the flat, total authority of a Wyoming blizzard at altitude, and for a moment the world was nothing but white noise and wind and the sound of Diesel landing in the snow beside him and immediately moving forward, pulling against the leash with a focus that was not excitement, but urgency. The controlled, deliberate urgency of a dog who understands that time is a factor and that the person at the end of this trail is running out of it. They reached the cruiser in 40 seconds. Logan looked through the cracked driver's side window and saw her. She was conscious. Her face was pale and tight with pain, and her hands were gripping the steering wheel not for control, but for something to hold. Her breath was visible inside the cab. Her left leg was pinned beneath the compressed dash, and the angle of it told Logan, with the clinical immediacy of someone who has assessed injuries in far worse conditions, that the blood flow to her lower leg was compromised and that the cold was accelerating the damage. "I'm going to get you out," he said through the window. His voice was calm and level in the way that voices are calm when the person speaking has decided that calm is not a feeling but a tool. "What's your name?" "Solis," she said. "Rachel Solis. Fremont County Sheriff's Department. How long have you been here?" 40 minutes. Maybe longer. She looked at him through the cracked glass. "Radio's dead. Cell service dropped before the tree hit. I called dispatch at 3:40, but I don't know if it went through." It had not gone through. Logan would learn this later. Dispatch had not received the call because the county's emergency communication repeater on Copper Mountain had been offline since August, when the Fremont County Commission, under the direction of Commissioner Preston Garfield, had voted to defer maintenance on the repeater system as part of a budget reallocation that had moved $340,000 from emergency services to a road-widening project on the east side of the county that happened to benefit 3 commercial properties owned by Garfield's brother-in-law. The vote had been 3-2. The 2 dissenting commissioners had been publicly called obstructionists by Garfield and the Riverton Ranger. The county's volunteer search and rescue coordinator, a retired fire chief named Walt Jessup, had resigned in protest after the vote, and had told the newspaper, on the record, that someone was going to die on a back road because of that repeater. Garfield had responded with 4 words that Walt Jessup had never forgotten. "That's not my problem." Rachel Solis was now Preston Garfield's problem. She simply didn't know it yet. Logan assessed the tree. It was 16 inches in diameter at the break point, and it lay across the cruiser's hood and a pillar at an angle that had compressed the driver's side inward, but had not crushed the roof. The weight was enormous, but not immovable. He needed leverage, a fulcrum, and time. And time was the resource the storm was consuming fastest. He went back to his truck and pulled a high-lift jack, a tow chain, and a pry bar from the bed, tools he kept there not out of habit, but out of the particular preparedness of a man who had learned that the distance between a manageable situation and a fatal one was usually measured in minutes and equipment. Diesel had not followed him to the truck. Diesel had stayed at the cruiser. He had positioned himself at the driver's side window and was standing with his body pressed against the door, his head turned toward Rachel and his breath fogging the glass in slow, steady intervals. Rachel looked at the dog. The dog looked at her. She put her hand flat against the inside of the window, and Diesel pressed his nose to the same spot on the outside, and neither of them moved for a long moment. In the back seat, one of the puppies began to cry, a high, thin sound that cut through the wind and the pain and the cold, and reached something in Logan that training could not touch and discipline could not quiet. He looked through the rear window. 3 puppies, 8 weeks old, huddled on a blanket. He saw the cardboard box on the floor, collapsed and wet. He understood. "You picked them up," he said. "Side of the highway," Rachel said. Her voice was tighter now. The cold was doing its work. Box was closed. Someone just left them. Logan set the jack against the base of the tree where it crossed the A-pillar and began to work. The jack moved in slow, grinding increments, and the tree shifted with each pump, a quarter inch, a half inch, the metal of the cruiser groaning as the pressure redistributed. His shoulder burned where the shrapnel lived. The cold turned his hands into instruments that responded to will rather than feeling. He pumped the jack. He watched the gap. Diesel watched the road. 11 minutes. It took 11 minutes to raise the tree enough to create clearance for the door. Logan wrenched it open, reached in, and freed Rachel's leg from beneath the compressed dash with the controlled precision of someone who has moved injured people out of destroyed vehicles in conditions far more hostile than these, and who understands that speed without care creates new injuries. Her leg was bruised and swollen, but unbroken. She gasped when the pressure released, not a scream, a gasp. The sound of someone returning to a body they had been leaving. He carried her to his truck. Then he went back for the puppies. He gathered them one at a time, each one small enough to hold in one hand, each one trembling, each one pressing into his palm with the desperate warmth seeking of an animal that has been cold for too long, and he set them on the passenger seat beside Diesel. Diesel looked down at the 3 puppies that were now climbing over his paws and pressing against his chest and nosing into the thick fur along his neck. And he did not move. He lowered his head slowly and rested his chin on the back of the smallest one and closed his eyes. And the puppy stopped trembling. Logan drove Rachel to the hospital in Thermopolis. He called the Fremont County Sheriff's Department from the hospital lobby and reported the accident and the location of the cruiser and the status of Deputy Solis. The dispatcher thanked him and told him that they had not received Rachel's original call and that no one had been dispatched to County Road 14 and that the repeater on Copper Mountain was still offline. She told him this in the flat, exhausted voice of someone who has reported a problem to people who do not listen and has stopped expecting the listening to begin. Logan made a second call. It was to Walt Jessup, whose name he had heard at the feed store in Meteets 3 weeks earlier, from a rancher who had described the retired fire chief as the only man in this county who ever gave a damn about the back roads. Walt picked up on the first ring. "The repeater," Logan said. "How long has it been down?" "Since August 14th, Walt said. 63 days. Someone almost died today because of it." "Someone was always going to," Walt said. They met the following morning at a diner in Riverton. Walt brought the documentation, the commission vote, the budget reallocation, the maintenance deferral, his letter of resignation, and the Riverton Ranger article that quoted Garfield's 4 words. Logan brought the facts from the accident, the dead radio, the failed call to dispatch. The 40 minutes Rachel Solis had spent pinned in a cruiser in a blizzard, with no way to reach anyone and no one coming. He also brought a name, a JAG attorney in Cheyenne he'd served with, who now practiced civil litigation and who had agreed, after a 10-minute phone call, to review the county's liability for the repeater failure. Preston Garfield learned about the attorney's inquiry 4 days later. He responded the way powerful men in small counties respond when their decisions are questioned by people they consider outsiders. He called the sheriff and suggested, without quite saying it directly, that the deputy's accident was her own fault for driving a back road in a storm, and that any outside interference in county governance would be dealt with appropriately. The sheriff, to his credit, hung up. The county commission held a public meeting on November 3rd. Logan attended. Walt attended. Rachel Solis attended. On crutches, in her uniform, the room was full. Ranchers, Deputies, teachers, the kind of people who don't go to commission meetings unless something is broken badly enough that silence is no longer possible. Diesel sat at Logan's side in the aisle, motionless, his amber eyes fixed on the front of the room with the steady, unblinking attention of a dog who has assessed the environment and determined that the most important thing in it is about to happen. Preston Garfield sat at the center of the commission table. He was 59 years old, thick through the middle, with the groomed confidence of a man who had held office for 11 years and had never once lost a vote he cared about. He looked at the crowd and saw inconvenience. He looked at Rachel Solis and saw liability. He looked at Logan Hayes and saw a stranger. "This isn't an open forum for grievances," Garfield said. "There's an agenda." Logan stood. Diesel stood with him. The dog's movement drew the room's attention the way the movement of a large, trained animal always draws attention, not through noise, but through the absolute authority of something that is clearly not uncertain about its purpose. "Commissioner," Logan said. His voice carried the particular quality that comes from years of delivering briefings in rooms where the wrong word had consequences that lasted longer than the meeting. On October 14th, Deputy Solis transmitted a distress call on the county emergency frequency from County Road 14. That call was not received by dispatch because the Copper Mountain repeater has been offline for 63 days. The repeater was taken offline when this commission voted to defer its maintenance and redirect the funding. Deputy Solis spent 40 minutes trapped in a vehicle in a blizzard, with no communication and no response. I removed her from that vehicle. She is here. She is alive. The question I have for you is simple. How many people on back roads in this county need to nearly die before that repeater is repaired? Garfield's face tightened. You don't have standing to address this commission. I'm a resident of Meteets, Logan said. I'm a taxpayer in this county. And I'm a retired senior chief petty officer with 20 years of service to this country. I spent 4 deployments making sure that when someone called for help, help came. You cut the system that makes help come. I'm standing here telling you to put it back. Nobody in the room spoke. Garfield looked at Logan. He looked at Diesel, who had not moved, and who was watching him with the calm, unblinking focus of an animal that has no interest in dominance and no capacity for bluff. He looked at the room full of people who were watching him the way people watch when they have been waiting for someone to say what they have been thinking. This will be reviewed, Garfield said. It's already being reviewed, Logan said. By an attorney. The question is whether you fix it before the review is finished or after. Someone in the back of the room exhaled. A woman near the window put her hand over her mouth. Rachel Solis, sitting in the front row with her crutches leaned against the chair beside her, looked at Logan and then at Diesel. And she nodded once. The slow, deliberate nod of a person who has spent 40 minutes believing no one was coming and is now watching someone arrive. The repeater on Copper Mountain was repaired on November 19th. The cost was $14,200. Preston Garfield voted against the expenditure. He was the only vote against. He did not run for re-election the following year. His brother-in-law's road-widening project was audited by the state comptroller's office in January and found to have been awarded without competitive bidding. The findings were referred to the county prosecutor. Garfield moved to Casper. Nobody in Fremont County asked him to stay. 7 months after the storm on County Road 14, Logan Hayes sat on the porch of his ranch outside Meteets with a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he had been watching the pasture and had forgotten he was holding it. The shrapnel in his shoulder ached the way it always ached in the mornings, a dull, familiar presence that he had stopped resenting and started treating as a kind of clock. It told him the weather was changing before the sky did. The fence along the north line was finished. The barn was weather-tight. The quiet was the same quiet it had always been, but it had begun to feel less like absence and more like something he had chosen. Diesel lay on the porch boards in a square of morning sun, his right foreleg stretched out in front of him, his eyes half closed in the slow, contented blink of a dog who has completed his assessment and found everything in order. Beside him, arranged in a loose pile of fur and warmth and the particular carelessness of sleep that only very young animals achieve, 3 7-month-old puppies dozed against his ribs. They had names now: Birch, Cedar, and the smallest one, the one who had pressed into Diesel's neck in the truck that day and stopped trembling, was called Summit. Rachel had tried to take them to the rescue in Riverton. Logan had said he'd keep them until she was healed. She had healed. He had not returned them. Diesel had made this decision clear by sleeping in a circle around all 3 on the first night and refusing to move when Logan had suggested, without conviction, that 3 additional dogs was perhaps more than a man with 40 acres and a shrapnel shoulder needed. The matter was not discussed again. Rachel still drove County Road 14. The radio worked now. She drove it knowing that if a tree fell, or the road iced, or the world turned sideways in the way it sometimes does on back roads in Wyoming in winter, her voice would reach someone. She drove it knowing that because one man had turned onto a road he didn't need to be on, following a dog whose judgment he trusted more than the weather, she was still driving it all. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a truck turning onto a frozen county road because a dog sat up and went still, and that was enough. Because the bond between a man and the animal beside him was strong enough to override the weather and the distance and the simple human impulse to keep driving toward the warm house at the end of the easy road. God does not always repair the broken systems or hold the negligent accountable or send help in the forms we recognize. Sometimes he sends it in the form of a man with a jack and a pry bar and a dog whose loyalty has been tested in places most of us will never see and proven in ways most of us will never understand. And sometimes he places 3 small lives inside a wrecked car on a frozen road so that the man who saves them discovers, in the saving, that he is not as finished with the world as he believed. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that showing up on the hard roads in the worst weather when no one else is coming is still the most important thing a person can do. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and tell us, have you ever been the one who stopped when everyone else kept driving? Your story might be the one that convinces someone else to turn down the road they didn't need to be on. If you believe in stories of courage, loyalty, and the quiet strength of ordinary people, and the extraordinary dogs beside them, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always, on every frozen road, in every storm, you are never alone.